Today we check out the legends of the Dark Knight. Hello again, Bat fans! In this episode we are going to check out the first couple of storylines from the iconic series known as Legends of the Dark Knight. The year is 1989, and thanks to the Batman movie, the sales of the Batman comics improved dramatically. According to Alan Grant, who was writing Detective Comics at the time, they were selling up to 75,000 comics each month before the movie. But after the Batman movie, the sales skyrocketed and they started selling more than 500,000 comics each month. In other words, the demand for Batman comics was extremely high, so naturally DC decided to give the people a new Batman comic. Legends of the Dark Knight was promoted as the first new Batman solo book since 1940. The idea was to make this a solo Batman book to create similar stories to the one in the Batman movie, where there was absolutely no Robin. So if you're into solo Batman stuff, Legends of the Dark Knight is the perfect book for you. Now, unlike the regular comic books back then, where the story was almost always self-contained or at most it lasted for 3 issues, in Legends, the stories were developed in 5 issues, much like in modern comics. This allowed creative teams to spend much more time developing the story as a whole. The first storyline in Legends was called Shaman, and it was written by Dennis O'Neil with art by Ed Hannigan. The story is called Shaman because that is the main theme of the story. While Bruce was still young and learning all the skills to become Batman, he went to Alaska in order to improve his manhunting skills. He was tracking down a dangerous criminal, but he almost died from the cold. A shaman found Bruce and saved him by telling him an ancient story about a bat while wearing a bat mask. Later, Bruce returned to Gotham, but this little adventure followed him. In his first year as Batman, some dark cult appeared in Gotham, and it was connected to the ancient tribes of Alaska. And to make things worse, someone stole the bat mask from the shaman and was wearing it as he murdered people in Gotham. Bruce returned to Alaska to solve the mystery and learned that it was all partially his fault because his actions and recklessness had sent the wrong kind of people to Alaska. Nevertheless, in his second journey to Alaska, Bruce realized that he had special powers connected to the bat. Bruce returns to Gotham to stop the cult from killing more innocent people and also recovers the bat mask from the murderer, who was in fact the same criminal he was tracking down all those years back in Alaska. This initial story is very interesting for a number of reasons. First, it takes place simultaneously with Batman Year 1. We even get to see another perspective of what happened that first night when Bruce went out to the East End. Those moments are taken directly from Year 1. But Shaman fixes something that Year 1 didn't do right. It shows us the first time that Bruce puts on the Batsuit in this great page by Ed Hannigan, arranged in a 9-panel layout. It's certainly overly dramatic, but it makes sense because it's a very important moment in the history of Batman. And speaking of important moments, Shaman also shows us how Bruce and Alfred found the cave underneath Wayne Manor and decided to turn it into Batman's base of operations. The Batcave was created because the activities of Batman were not meant to be done in Wayne Manor, and the cave where Bruce fell into as a kid was the perfect place. Denny O'Neil did a great job in this story, as usual, and once again he took Batman out of Gotham. Most of the stories written by Denny have Batman out of the big city, and this one is not the exception. But Denny also introduces something that is going to be extremely important in just a few years. Denny was also the writer on the Question comic, and in that comic, he created the infamous island of Santa Prisca, a place in the Caribbean known for the extensive drug trade. In Shaman, Denny introduces the name of Santa Prisca as Batman is investigating the mysterious cult in Gotham. Santa Prisca doesn't play an important part in this story, but as we all know, it will become one of the most important places in the Batman mythos. Now, even though this is an amazing thriller by Denny O'Neil, it's not perfect. The fact that there are 2 criminals on the loose makes the mystery become confusing at certain points. But other than that, Batman Shaman is a good story with great art. The balance between Dark Knight and detective is perfectly achieved, and the characterization by Denny is flawless, as usual. Now, even better than that is the second storyline in Legends of the Dark Knight. It is called Gothic, and it is the second Batman story ever written by Grant Morrison. After his successful breakthrough with Arkham Asylum, Grant Morrison came up with another Batman story. Unlike Arkham Asylum, Gothic is a more traditional superhero comic book story, both in terms of narrative and graphically, as it was illustrated by the great Klaus Janson. Now, the story is called Gothic because the main plot is developed around the idea that the Gotham Cathedral, which was built using Gothic architecture, is going to be used as a doomsday device to annihilate the population of Gotham City. The evil mastermind behind this grandiose scheme is a man who made a deal with the devil and was granted 300 years of life. But his time is running out, and the devil will soon come to take his soul. This man is known as Mr. Whisper, and he intends to offer Satan all the souls of Gotham in exchange of his own. But as he sets his plan in motion, he starts killing all-time gangsters who attacked him many years in the past. This is what gets Batman's attention. At first, the gangsters try to make a deal with Batman in order to stop Mr. Whisper, but the Dark Knight refuses to help them. Regardless, Batman has to stop the murderer, because that is what he does. When he confronts Mr. Whisper, however, he recognizes him and recalls that he was one of his teachers at school before his parents died. Batman notices how strange it is that Mr. Whisper hasn't aged a single day since he was a kid, and he starts investigating. His detective work takes Batman all the way to Austria, where he uncovers the whole truth about Mr. Whisper as he comes across supernatural forces. In the end, Batman manages to stop Mr. Whisper and saves Gotham City while the villain is taken to the depths of hell by the devil. Gothic is yet another supernatural thriller. However, the supernatural elements in Gothic are more blatant than in Shaman. In Gothic, once we know that the enemy is immortal, we have an idea of how Batman can stop him. The mystery is gone. In Shaman, the supernatural is present as part of the subtext of the story. Batman is somehow connected to the powerful avatar of the Bat, as if he was destined to become Batman. But knowing that doesn't spoil the fun of the story. The real mystery keeps going, and the supernatural remains untouched even after the story ends. In that way, we can compare the two stories and see why one is more effective than the other. Now, I'm not saying Gothic is plain bad. On the contrary, Gothic is a massive improvement from Grant Morrison since Arkham Asylum. In Gothic, he gives us Batman as a Dark Knight and a great detective, which is just what he missed in his first story. Granted, Batman is a bit melodramatic in Gothic, but that's mostly because of how the story was structured. In any case, Gothic is a powerful Batman story that confronts the Dark Knight versus the unknown, and that's always quite interesting. Something that strikes me a lot about both stories is how similar they are to Batman the Cult. Think about it. In Shaman, there's a cult in Gotham killing people, and in Gothic, the main enemy is an immortal guy who wants to destroy Gotham. That sounds exactly like Deacon Blackfire and his unholy crusade from Batman the Cult. Just something to think about. Now, the great thing about both stories is how each explore different moments in Bruce's past. Shaman takes a look at Bruce's life just moments before he returned to Gotham, and Gothic explores Bruce's childhood in a private school, moments before the death of his parents. And speaking of that scene, this moment created by Grant Morrison doesn't match another moment written by Jim Starlin in the final issue of his run in Batman. He established that Bruce and his parents went to the movies after a serious discussion between them. Now here, Grant Morrison explains how they went to the movies to celebrate Bruce returning home from school. It doesn't make much sense, and as usual, it's clear that Grant Morrison doesn't really care about continuity, which was actually perfect, since Legends of the Dark Knight wasn't always attached to the tight continuity of the main Batman comics. These stories could take place anytime in the history of Batman and they would still work. I've already said how Shaman takes place during year 1, but Gothic could take place anytime, which is perfect considering Morrison is not a fan of continuity. And speaking of continuity, in the next episode we resume the regular comic book history of Batman, and we check out the rise of the Penguin and the training of Tim Drake. If you don't wanna miss that, subscribe now and come back for the next episode. Until then, Godspeed, my friends.